Okay, this is gonna be a really fun video. This is my first Tone Poet review of 2024. Today I review Polycurrents by Elvin Jones. All right, so let's get into this fantastic gem. The fantastic Polycurrents by Elvin Jones was recorded in September 1969 and released in June of 1970 on the Blue Note label. Polycurrents was originally recorded by Rudolph Van Gelder. And of course, the Tone Poet release has been produced by Joe Harley and mastered by Kevin Gray at Coherent Audio. It was mastered from the original tapes and pressed at RTI. It's produced on 180 gram vinyl and comes in a glossy tip-on gatefold jacket with full color session photos. And I just love this photograph of Elvin Jones here, man. Just a really cool photograph. The lineup on Polycurrents isn't exactly a who's who of Blue Note titans. In fact, we really have a wide variety of musicians on here. From the little known Fred Tompkins, who's playing his first and only session as a sideman here, and really only released a handful of albums as a leader, to the prolific saxophone player Pepper Adams, who not only led many sessions, but appeared with some huge artists like Chet Baker, Donald Byrd, Thad Jones, Charles Mingus, and Lee Morgan. There are 7 pieces in this band with some interesting instrumentation like flute, English horn, bass flute, baritone sax, and congas. And notably, the arrangements on this album are spread across many of the musicians on this album, with Joe Farrell, Fred Tompkins, Wilbur Little, and even Elvin's wife, Keiko, all getting an opportunity to pen tunes here. This lineup is a departure from Jones's first 2 Blue Note offerings, which included trios, because Elvin wanted to try something different for Polycurrents. Jones says, producer Frank Wolf and I dreamed the title up together using the Greek prefix poly, meaning many or diverse, to indicate the various rhythmic currents that can be felt in these performances, as well as the cross-section of melodic ideas. Okay, so from the jump, we are sucked into this amazing polyrhythmic treat of an album. Track 1 is a long 14-minute tune that might seem familiar to you if you are familiar with the music of Yusef Lateef. The rhythm section on this track is very percussive, leaning heavily into African and even Latin beats. The English horn, tenor sax, and flute keep this track sounding innovative and fresh by having one foot in the east and the other foot in the west. Jones gets off a long solo, which is really more of a compliment to the composition than sort of a outright drum solo, leaning into the concept rather than distracting from the tune, which can sometimes happen, as you well know, from lengthy drum solos. Jones says the track is meant to be a salute to the agenda in the nations in the process of being formed on the continent of Africa. He adds, "This was something I heard in my mind as an almost symphonic rendition with a contrapuntal feeling of rhythm against melody, the 12/8 meter, and using Joe on the English horn." Okay, so what the heck does contrapuntal mean? In music, the words mean 2 or more independent melodic lines. And this is a theme in Jones's music. Polyrhythms, contrapuntal, even the 12/8 meter is a clue to how this tune has some non-traditional rhythms going on. And these are techniques that Jones is a master of and very well known for, creating rhythms that are not only non-traditional, but even playing multiple rhythms simultaneously, which, because it's Elvin Jones, is really beautiful and creates an experience that many of us are not used to hearing every day. I'm gonna get into the sound of this pressing a little later, but I just have to say that cranking this record up and sitting in the sweet spot is quite a sonic experience. I'm a very emotional listener, so when I get locked in on a great piece of music, you might even catch me with a tear or two in my eye. It's just, that's why we listen, right? That is why we listen. Okay, track 2, Agape Love, is penned by Joe Farrell, who plays tenor, English horn, flute, and bass flute on this album. And right from the beginning, we get Pepper Adams' baritone and Farrell's flute. This is a very, very cool, slow, bluesy tune. And this is a highlight and a real treat. It might be my favorite track on the album. Jones has the confidence to just lay out on this track and create an ambience and a mood rather than playing like he has something to prove. This track is just 10 out of 10 for me. Track 3 is called Mr. Jones, and I would classify this as a hard bop-ish, avant-garde-ish tune, but with those polyrhythmic beats coming from Elvin's drums. This track features more saxophone than on the 2 previous tracks, and Mr. Jones was composed by Elvin's wife, Keiko, and the playing on this track is awesome. And I just need to mention Wilbur Little's bass. It really shines on this album, and in many ways, Wilbur's bass is kind of the thing that keeps the band grounded on these tracks, and his playing is just fantastic. Really, truly a highlight of this album. Little doesn't have a ton of credits to his name, but he performed multiple times as a sideman for Elvin Jones and J.J. Johnson. And he was also the bassist in Tommy Flanagan's trio. Track 4 is called Yes and is a Fred Tompkins composition, which is a beautiful short interplay between sax and flute. It serves as a sort of interlude bridging us to the last track. Elvin and Wilbur Little will play about as straightforward as you will hear them on this album, and Joe Farrell's bass flute really helps to add texture and depth to the harmonies and melodies here. It's just a short, fun tune. The album closes out with a tune called or and that might very well be your reaction when you get done listening to this track. Again, this is another hard bop tune on rhythmic steroids, similar to track 3. It's frenetic, but it's also a journey that takes us to the edge and then allows us to take a breath in intervals, even if just for a moment. And the final section of this track just locks in on a groove which revisits the original theme. As Elvin puts it, loaded with polycurrents. It has all kinds of interesting variations like Train used when I was with him. And of course, Elvin speaking of John Coltrane, with whom he performed many times, even appearing on many of his albums, including A Love Supreme. All right, so how does this Tone Poet reissue of Polycurrent sound? Well, this album has some pros and cons. And I understand I'm being extremely analytical here, and I'm not here to do you a disservice by holding anything back. One pretty dramatic side note, by the way, and this is particular to this pressing. When I did my Lee Morgan Cornbread shootout, the Tone Poet pressing had a bunch of oily streaks and marks and prints all over both sides. And a viewer pointed out in the comments section that they strongly believed that this was due to the inner sleeves that RTI uses. And as soon as they said it, I was like, yep, that makes sense. And those marks did eventually clean off. Now, this is important not only cosmetically, but also sonically, because when I initially listened to this album, no marks, no smudges, no prints, but I was getting a little bit of distortion. And I was ready to report to you that there was distortion on the saxophones on this record. But I thought, you know what? Let me clean this record up and listen again. And distortion gone. Now, I mean, take that how you want to take it. It was very subtle, but it definitely seems like there is something going on with the inner sleeves that come with these Tone Poets. And if they are the culprit, it's not only impacting the records cosmetically, but also sonically. And I would not recommend dropping the needle on your Tone Poets without first cleaning them. And I know that goes without saying for many of you, but I mean, I'm just saying, you don't want your stylus picking up whatever oil is coming off these sleeves, negatively impacting your stylus, but also the sonics of these records. Okay, bird's eye view of this Tone Poet reissue is that it is amazing. Strong dynamics, horns sound really good, and overall the acoustics are very nice and clean. No complaints on the reissue at all, except for what I believe is possibly an inner sleeve issue. But the critical listener, and I have to say this because it's an aspect of recorded music, but the critical listener might pick up on a few things inherent in the recording and mixing of this album. And I do want to be clear that everything I'm about to say is pressing agnostic, meaning it's not unique to any one pressing. but especially for monophiles, this album could sound a little bit left channel heavy, especially on side 1. Side 2 seems to be a little bit more balanced, but honestly, it's gonna be on a track by track basis. I could say that it doesn't really bother me all that much, except I felt like I needed to mention it, so I guess it does bother me to some degree. Again, super nitpicky, but I just need to mention it. And also, I believe because of all of the drum work that's happening on this album, and potentially the way that the drums were mic'd or mixed, and that, you know, some of the frequencies can easily start tripping over each other, and because a lot of that information is happening on the left channel, is that it can get a little mushy at times, particularly in the bottom end. And I don't want to dwell on it because I don't want to undermine just how fantastic this album is and this pressing is. And if you've heard another pressing of this or a digital file of this, then I think this album is going to knock your socks off. I just want to make you aware of some of the sonic qualities inherent in the mix that I noticed, because those qualities might distract some listeners. Also, I want to say I did comp this to a digital file, and for all intents and purposes, they are exactly the same. Overall, I am very glad that I picked this one up. It is such a fantastic album, and it's really great that it got the Tone Poet treatment. All right, let's let Elvin Jones close out this video by summing up his feelings about Polycurrents. This is not by any means a gimmick. What we have here, I hope and believe, is music to think about, to react to emotionally, and discuss intellectually. I'm concerned with the cultural aspects of our art form. I want to provide it with whatever lasting value I can through my contribution, and I hope people will listen to it with that thought in mind. Time will tell. Polycurrents is an album to listen to again and again, as more statements, emotions, and even thoughtful questions reveal themselves to us. True art is experienced differently by every person that experiences it, and our own interpretation of art evolves as we grow and develop and progress through life. And that's what makes Polycurrents sound so fresh even today. It's the best kind of art, introspective, emotional, intellectual, and timeless. If you like this video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.